Hello again, everybody. For this video, I want to talk about Letter from Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King. I'll probably mention the Malcolm X message to the grassroots a couple of times, but I think I'm going to do another video just because I think if I did them both in the same video, it would be too long. I'm trying to keep these, on the shorter side so you can make it through them. Okay, so I want to talk about the Martin Luther King, technically a letter. I was going to say essay, I guess it's a letter, which is the context for it, right? So just to start, if we think about audience for both of these, Martin Luther King is writing a letter in response to a different letter that I think was published in the paper. Like he starts it off, "My dear fellow clergymen," and I think that's because before he writes this, these clergymen, right, these other church people, write some kind of letter or op-ed or something in the newspaper in Birmingham after a rally or march or whatever that King held, and he gets arrested, of course. That's why he's now in Birmingham jail. And this letter or op-ed appears in the newspaper, and then King in jail writes this letter that we're looking at. So yes, his audience, just to start off, is other kind of power players, right? It's other people within the church, not your everyday people on the ground, right? Whereas, in Message to the Grassroots, Malcolm X is definitely going to meet the people where they are, the masses, right? Where King is still kind of dealing with like the power brokers and like the higher levels. Another thing I want to start off talking about is the writing style. It makes for a really good comparison, I think, the writing style between King and Malcolm X, and it's similar to how we've been talking about form and stuff with the poetry, where like we can look at the kind of more traditional, I would say, writing style that MLK has, and the more like informal and direct writing style of Malcolm X. So why do I say this about the MLK about his writing style? I think one thing we notice, he makes a lot of references. Excuse me, a lot of references, right? A lot of allusions with an A, allusions, to things like right on the first page. He starts giving us quotes from the Apostle Paul. He starts quoting the Bible. He mentions Socrates like 5 times. Every time I go through this again, I'm always underlining all the times that he uses the name Socrates. So we see a lot of references to the Bible, which, maybe if we say, okay, well, he's writing to other clergymen, like maybe that's why he's doing that. But I think that's something he did anyway, right? He was very interested in his perspective being a Christian one. So I think he makes a lot of religious references all the time. So he's referencing the Bible, and he's referencing Socrates, which is, of course, ancient Greek philosophy. So these are kind of like the most traditional or conventional things that you could be referencing to back up your points. Like especially if you're going to college in the 50s, you would read so much of the Bible, you'd read so much Socrates. Like it's what they studied with the ancient texts. um, and I think maybe less than now, maybe because people nowadays I think care less about the Bible and Socrates. But even then, I don't think this is going to resonate with like poor people or like the masses in the street. I mean, maybe a lot of them were Christian, but maybe not. Um, so yes, he has a lot of like references and stuff. He has this very high-minded rhetoric, right? That's kind of what Martin Luther King is famous for, using these not only references but also like metaphors, where he talks about how we're going through the great storm of injustice and we'll make it to the mountaintop of equality or whatever. He's always saying stuff like that, right? So I think we can see some big differences with the writing style, which I think does have an important connection to like the message of what they're trying to say. Okay, another thing that I want to look at here, I'm looking at page 402 by the page numbers, the second page of the document that I gave you. And at this point, Martin Luther King lays out what he says are the 4 basic steps of his kind of approach to protesting and his idea of nonviolent direct action. So I'm reading here from 402. He says, in any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps: collection of the facts to determine whether injustice exists, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. So collection of the facts to determine whether injustice exists. I guess they have to get their magnifying glass and be like, oh wow, they're doing segregation. This is bad. And then negotiation. So then once they've determined that everything's fucked up, they then I guess try to meet with the mayor or the government of whatever city or state that they're looking at, and they try to negotiate. They say, here's what we think should be done, and they're probably talking to some extremely racist mayors and government officials who probably don't want to negotiate with them. So then they do self purification, which I'm always a little confused about, but I believe he talks a little bit later about these like workshops on nonviolence, where he says we repeatedly ask ourselves, "Are you able to accept blows without retaliating?" So I think that's what he means by self purification is like these like nonviolence workshops or whatever, where they prepare themselves to love their enemies and this kind of stuff. And then the last step he says is direct action, which is either a sit-in or a boycott or a protest or a strike or something like that. So this is his four-step process, right? So if we're thinking about for these poems, when I'm asking you about like theories of revolution and stuff, and where do they fit in on the politics of the civil rights movement? This was MLK's theory, I guess, of maybe not revolution, maybe that's not the right word, but theory of resistance or something like that. That you had to go through these four steps to try to improve things. Another thing that I want to address here. I said this in our recent discussion thread, but I want to talk about the idea of like the goal for each of these figures, for Martin Luther King and for Malcolm X. I think it's kind of a truism. It's a thing that people say all the time, especially like in high school history, where they'll be like, oh, MLK and Malcolm X, or like the peaceful, nonviolent protest Christian side, and the Black nationalist Nation of Islam side of the movements. That they had the same goal, but they just went about it in different ways. And I really think this is an oversimplification. I know it makes it easy to understand if we think about it that way, like, oh, they really just wanted the same thing. But I think like it's true on a certain level, but I think like for that to be true that they wanted the same thing or had the same goals, you'd have to be generalizing to like an extreme level. Like if we were so general and removed from the situation that we said, oh, they both want things to be better for black people, like in America. Yeah, like of course that's true, right? But if we have any kind of rigor to our analysis, any kind of depth uh, uh, to our ways of understanding these two thinkers, I think like if we inspect it on more than just the surface level, we can see that their goals really were not the same. Yes, they wanted things to be better for black people, but what that looked like for each of them was very different. It was not like the things that we associate with MLK, in terms of little white boys and little black boys playing together in the street and stuff like that. Like that's not the same things that the black nationalists were interested in. Obviously, in both visions, things are better for black people to treat more equal, but it's very different. And I think for what we're doing, we really need to get past that idea that they wanted the same thing but for different reasons. Their visions of equality are really fundamentally different, and I think we need to kind of grapple with that. So just to illustrate this point, to look at some other quotes, this is on page 403 here. King writes, you may well ask, well, why direct action? Why sit-ins and marches and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. So what he seems to be saying here, and there's one more quote. This is a little bit down also on 403. He says, the purpose of our direct action program is to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. So I take those as the times where he most explicitly lays out his goal, right? Like what he thinks can be achieved through this kind of protesting and stuff. And it's negotiation. He identifies negotiation as the thing they're trying to do. Like from the beginning, they are trying to cut a deal with the people in power. And you can say, well, that's a very practical way to look at it. Like he got more laws changed than Malcolm X did. Maybe that's true. I'm not totally sure. But you could make like the practical argument of like, oh, he's level-headed and he's trying to get things done. But like taking that approach is also what allows Malcolm X to say, desegregating a lunch counter, that's not a revolution. To say, using the same bathroom as white people, that's not equality. So it's like MLK, what I'm trying to say, his goal is to negotiate. His goal is to work with the people in power and find a way to, improve the position of black people, Whereas when we looked at, It's Nation Time, or the next video where I'll talk about the Malcolm X speech, they're not interested in compromising, right? They're not interested in negotiating, and they are very skeptical about like what can be achieved through negotiating with the people in power. This goes back to the black nationalist belief in like structural racism, and that like the American government is incapable of becoming of treating black people equal in any kind of real sense. Um, so I just really want to hammer home this point because I think it's super important if we're going to write about this in a way that's historically and academically correct and honest. That the goals were not the same, right? MLK is talking here about negotiating. Like, look at It's Nation Time. Like, is there going to be a negotiation there? Is that what he's trying to do? I really don't think so. So to me, that's just a fundamental difference in what they're trying to do here and what the vision for equality looks like. You know. Okay, couple other things. I want to look. Oh, okay, so there's one part here that I wanted to mention because I think this came up when I was talking about Citizen in some of those posts. So this is on page 404. I just want to read some of this where he's talking about his daughter watching a commercial. Okay, so let me see here for this place Funtown, which is like an amusement park or something. Um, he says on page 404, as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television and see tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness towards white people. When you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who's asking, Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean? So you get the point, right? I think this connects to Citizen very much because I think that focuses on kind of the psychological and emotional, trauma or problems or consequences for people who experience racism, right? And he gives this, very striking description of how he can see like his young daughter start to be affected by like realizing that racism is a thing. Um, and yeah, I just think that really sticks out, and I think it connects to the point being made in Citizen about the kind of they use the phrase John Henryism is the word they use in Citizen. It says the mental effects stemming from racism. So I think King really highlights that there. I just thought that was well said. Wanted to mark it. Okay, one other thing I wanted to point out. He has this part where he talks about what he calls the white moderate. So I think what he's getting at here is the kind of like political mainstream among white people, because it's like the way we think about Martin Luther King now, it's like, oh, like he's great. How could you have a problem with what he said? Like, he wanted to do things peacefully. That's good, right? That's the way we're taught about this. At the time period, people did not see it that way. Almost nobody saw it that way, or well, not almost nobody, but a very small percentage of people saw it that way. And when you say for like how many white people saw it that way, very small, very small. They have like opinion polls going back there where it's like, something like 15 or 20% of people approved of Martin Luther King. So like he gets painted in the educational system as like the hero of the time, and he was doing it the right way. He was one of the good ones, which is an incredibly racist way to frame it, of course. But that's how Martin Luther King is presented. But the fact is that during the time, he was very much reviled and hated by people who weren't, like he says here, Ku Klux Klan members, by people who were just like down the road, people who voted in elections and things, like people who weren't very involved in politics. They looked at it and they were like, oh no, they didn't like Martin Luther King. So he says here, on page 406, I must make 2 honest confessions to you, my Christian Jewish brothers. First, I must confess over the past few years I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. I just want to run one more here. Who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action. So that's the kind of what he means by the white moderate, the kind of person who was not like a straight up racist, who wasn't in a Klan or something like that, but who said things like, yeah, like I agree that we need to treat black people better, but I just don't know if this is the way to do it. Or like I don't agree with how you're protesting. This is really unnecessary. So he actually says here that he thinks that person, that the white moderate, is more of a problem in the move towards equality for black people than the straight up racist people. That's kind of shocking, right? But like it makes sense in a way because like what percentage of the population was really like that hardcore racist? I'm not sure, but I think a larger percentage was that kind of middle area where they were like, oh yeah, like the treatment of black people is bad, but protesting in the street, doing a march, doing a boycott, a strike, a sit-in, wow, that's too much. I think that was probably a greater number of people, right? So he was much more frustrated, it seems here, by that section of society than he was by the hardcore racists. So I think that's interesting, and I think I was talking about this in the Mississippi Goddamn video. I think that is the part. I think that is what Nina Simone's getting at in Mississippi Goddamn with that "do it slow" coming from the background, right? One other thing I wanted to look at here, we do get Martin Luther King's critique of black nationalism and implicitly of Malcolm X here. I just want to read some of this. Okay, so he's talking about like the two forces that MLK is trying to stand in the middle of and keep everybody together, and he talks about like there's some black people who have made it into the middle class and who have attained a certain level of luxury or whatever and have kind of become complacent and they don't want to help out or whatever. And then the other bad negative force that he identifies is black nationalism. He says here on page 408, the other force is one of bitterness and hatred, and it becomes perilously close to advocating violence. It is expressed in the various black nationalist groups that are springing up across the nation, the largest and best known being Elijah Muhammad's Muslim movement. Nourished by the Negro's frustration over the continued existence of racial discrimination, this movement is made up of people who have lost faith in America, who have absolutely repudiated Christianity, and who have concluded that the white man is an incorrigible devil. So that's his criticism of black nationalism, right? That it's based in hatred, and that that they've repudiated Christianity. Like I think to us reading that, it's like, well, so what? Like, why is that such a problem? Like if this is about politics and equality and shit like that, like do we really need to criticize them for not being Christians? Um, so that's kind of strange to me. And he says that they have lost faith in America. I think that's absolutely true. I think he's right about that. But I think black nationalists would respond like, yeah, that's a good thing. You need to lose faith in America. So it's like it almost the way MLK talks, it almost reminds me of like some of the things that like Obama says. Like there was a recent quote from Obama where he said like, I still believe in the possibility of America, which like means nothing, right? Like what does that actually mean? But he's talking here about still having faith in America, right? Like that was always the thing. So whereas black nationalism, they have the view of like structural racism and that the Constitution is fundamentally not for black people and not capable of granting them full equality. King looks at it. His position was like, America hasn't reached its the values that it came up with at the beginning. That we're still on our journey towards realizing the American dream or whatever. Whereas black nationalists would see the whole idea of America as kind of fundamentally flawed. King would say, well, we just haven't realized it yet, that like if we all come together as one country, we can make America what it was always supposed to be. Which it's and I can understand being on either side of that, but it's like if you asked James Madison or Alexander Hamilton or these people like what America's supposed to be in racial terms, what answer would they give? I don't know. But that's, anyway, the criticism that King had of the black nationalists, that they've lost faith in America, that, they've turned to hatred, and that, they come perilously close to advocating violence. Um, so, yeah, I think that's the main thing. Main things that I want us to get from this, but I want us to make sure that we have a good understanding of what King's theory of how resistance should work and how we can try to move towards equality was, and also what he thought the goal was. And I think his writing style helps us understand both of those. All right, so we'll have this in mind. We'll talk about Malcolm X soon in my next video. And I'll see you then.